Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to First Bank's webinar on fraud and fraud prevention, stopping a thief, modern day fraud prevention. My name is Pete Richardson. I'm the Managing Director of C&I Banking for First Bank in the Midwest region. Welcome all today. Just want to give a quick intro on why we're doing this. And I've been in banking and in finance, took a stint as a CFO myself. So I've seen this from both sides of the table. In my entire 23-year career, we've had very similar webinars, and at a certain point you kind of think to yourself, well, I've heard this, why am I here? Why do we keep having the same topic? Well, we keep having the same topic because as repetitive as it may seem, cyber fraud and fraudsters and other types of financial fraud are never ending. And as that keeps evolving, we need to stay vigilant as a financial institution, but also as consumers of financial products. We need to stay vigilant to that. So therefore, we think it's always timely to have these discussions, and a good deal of interest from our client base, consumer through businesses on this topic. So, that's why we have that. And, a data point that I had just heard this week that really drives home how big of an issue fraud is and continues to be is that the World Economic Forum recently reported that cyber fraud will exceed 10.5 trillion, and that's with a T, by 2025, making it the third largest economy in the world. So this is a very, it's basically not going away. It's a big problem, and it will continue to be, and technology and things will continue to make that vigilance all the more important. So joining me today are Walt Czerminski from, from Cytellix, and Ron Steinkamp from Armanino. And I will let those gentlemen introduce themselves.
Thank you. So before I was on the product side, I was the Chief Information Security Officer for two of the major banks, State Street Bank and Brown Brothers Harriman. Sat on the Anti-Fraud Committee, and I'm really glad to be able to share my thoughts here in this forum.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ron Steinkamp. I'm a partner at Armanino. We're a CPA and professional services consulting firm, headquartered in San Ramon, California, but we're across the country. We're in the top 20 CPA firms. I've done a lot of work over the last 30 years, focused on internal audit, internal controls, fraud prevention, detection. I'm a CPA as well as a certified fraud examiner. So definitely this is an area that's near and dear to my heart. I like to talk about this as much as I can so we can arm folks with the information that they need to prevent and detect fraud. So yeah, that's who I am.
Okay, great. And I think, we kind of decided there's so many ways to tackle this because it's such a big issue that, we wanted to walk people kind of through the evolution of fraud, or at least what fraud looks like today, what's been changing, what's new in that arena. And we're also going to kind of take a two-pronged approach to talk about kind of external fraud, and then a little bit of a focus on the second half of the program about internal fraud and controls and things that you can do to help eliminate both the internal and external fraud. But Walt, do you want to, share your thoughts on that external piece?
Be glad to. One of the questions where I was asked is, both what is cyber, what are cyber exploits really, like what does fraud look like in that realm? And it's not a lot different than traditional, old school fraud, right? Where someone is trying to take something from you. And we would always say, you can solve all fraud by just not giving people anything, right? Don't give them your money, don't give them access to your credentials, don't, let them know who you are. That's not realistic, right? So what is different now than in the past? The main thing is that we're in a digital economy. We're reliant on digital tools in everything we do. You don't write letters anymore, you send emails, right? You text. We use a variety of electronic means to communicate. And the same goes for how we move money and how we protect our assets. What has changed in that digital landscape is that the criminals, they're global crime syndicates, sometimes used by global, by some of the global economies, right, as fronts to be able to conduct exploits. But these global crime syndicates are out there making a tremendous amount of money via ransomware, exploiting, stealing assets, holding assets hostage. It's an extremely large economy. There are also mom and pop shops, people who pay $500 on the dark web to buy a kit that can provide them the capability to deliver ransomware to your doorstep. And what we do is you click on that link. Plus, now there are AI bots, right? If that's not enough, that you have all these large and small organizations going after your valuable assets, AI bots are amplifying that and making the process faster and more efficient. Part of what you may see there is you may see an email with a logo from your bank that is an exact version of the bank logo and maybe even a better one in terms of quality. Didn't used to be the case 3-4 years ago. You'd be able to distinguish those types of exploits better. It means that it relies on the individual to know that you're in the middle of a crime tsunami and there's more to come. It's just going to amplify. The number that you throw out, Pete, is daunting, certainly. It's going to keep rising. And the reality is, we started saying 7-8 years ago, is you're in the middle of a big war. Don't see it, but it's there and it's ongoing. It's underneath the surface. But what hasn't changed is the targets remain the same. It's money, directly or indirectly. It's the value that you hold, and now that value is stored digitally. So that's where criminals are going next in great volume, seeking to exploit that. It's about a con artist, less, the person that's going to hold you up directly. They require your cooperation. Once again, emphasizing that you need to know what your assets are and how you should protect yourself. So that aspect of the digital world, social engineering, is dominant. It may be a phone call, it may be a text, it may be an email, but in any digital form where people interact, there's the possibility you'll be approached by a con artist who is seeking to take your assets. So what can you do about that? One, obvious thing, don't do anything at all. Don't interact with the world. They'll be safe. But if you are interacting, be vigilant. Whatever communications you get digitally, whether through email or text or by phone, be familiar with that source before communicating with them, or certainly before giving them any access to what is of value to you, your credentials, your name, your telephone number. It requires us to be vigilant. The good guideline for this is trust but verify. If you're going into any situation, if you don't know who the author is on the other side from you, who the person you're interacting with, make sure you do. Verify before you give them any type of information, before
Brian, I think we may have lost Walt there, and apologies for some of the sound quality there. I know Walt was trying to join us from a remote location, so hopefully he joins us again soon. But he was kind of talking about trust but verify, and I think that's a topic we talked a lot about as a panel leading up to this. And Ron, feel free to jump in on this, but yeah. I think one of the things that we tend to fall into is that, hey, there's technology, and let's let technology make everything easier for us. And while that's great, there is still a ton of value that can be added in the old, somebody, call them. Or if the CEO, somebody may have hacked into the CEO's email and said, oh, you got to wire this money or send this confidential information or change an employee's direct deposit info, walk down the hall or pick up the phone and say, did you really do that? And know the practices of the people that you're speaking to. And I would also say, I think some of this with technology, it is helping fraudsters some of the things that were usually telltale signs of fraud being misspelled emails and things like that. With AI and things, even people working for these foreign crime syndicates somewhere, that AI can help really enhance the email and learn from a specific individual's mannerisms, expressions. So that's not as obvious. But what's really hard to, I think, for a fraudster to get around is if I picked up my phone and said, "Hey, Ron, did you just ask me to wire you money?"
Yeah, I'll second that, Pete. I'm a big believer in the trust but verify, right? And I'm sure everybody on the call can attest that they're probably getting emails or text messages or something every day that's asking them. It look a little odd, if you get that feeling in the pit of your stomach or something seems strange, you're not expecting it, you need to verify before you do anything, because that's definitely how they get you, right? I mean, and I'll give you an example. We test this all the time at our firm, and we go through and we'll test this for clients as well. And we find some of the of our clients, the folks who are in the positions of the most trust, for some reason, haven't learned this lesson yet. And it does really hurt the organization. So yeah, I mean, Pete, I agree with you. Pick up the phone, walk down the hall, whatever it might be. I was even part of I belong to a professional organization here of auditors and fraud examiners. And our treasurer got an email one day, wanted him to wire some money, said it came from the president. Unfortunately, he didn't verify. He wired that money. And that money has not been recovered to this day. So definitely verify everything.
Great. And Walt, see you're back. So sorry about the inconvenience there.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the choppiness on it. I hope I'm coming through a little bit better.
Sounds like it.
Still chop. All right, good. I'll try to keep it this way. Just piggybacking on what you're saying, I think there are measures that we could take too, inside of our lives. Like one of the more important things, just as a company has to educate its employees about the cautions that it has to take. Make sure that you have a circle of trust, right, within your household. Everybody in your home is a potential weakest link. If your son or daughter or your mom or dad, like, click on a link, they're potentially bringing in malware into your environment. That's how most malware comes into a network, via an email or an inadvertent click on a website. I think being able to understand that within your home, that you're only as strong as the person whose habits are the least vigilant is important, right? And there is an aspect of education here, because once your home network gets hit, everybody else is exposed within that. I think that's an important consideration. And of course, you want to make sure that in your home network, you have a firewall and protect it. It's a little bit of a hassle to get on with tech support for your internet service provider, but it's worth it. If one time, get a good firewall in place to make sure that you have that aspect of protection, and that'll solve many of your problems. And so, as individuals, like that matters. Maybe one more thing that most people aren't aware of: instead of using a browser, use the app. Like, banking apps are some of the most secure. You want to access banking information via the app versus via a browser. Browsers tend to be more susceptible. What can you do if you're in a larger organization? You want to understand what your risk is too. How exposed is your small company or larger company? Knowing what your particular posture is important. The platform centers its value on that for our clients, making sure that first and foremost, they understand where they stand. Because usually threat actors will go after the most exposed person, the most vulnerable, right? You don't want to be that, that gazelle being taken down by the cheetah, so to speak, right? You want to be in the middle of the herd, so know where you are. I think, also being able to maintain fraud controls that are proper, that second level of checking, walking down the hall, talking to your colleagues and asking the question, did you send me this, is always a good practice. And within an organization, we could transfer some of the risk that you already have by taking insurance and having an insurance company take on some of the risk in your cybersecurity program. Your security providers, whether they're internal or external, could take on some of that risk as well. And your partners, your suppliers, and also. And amidst all of this, so those are some of the controls. Ron, I know that you work with a lot of organizations and you have to advise you on what can be done.
Yeah, well, one of the questions that just came over on the Q&A, and feel free, everyone, if you have questions, to utilize the Q&A function in Zoom, is, what are some best practices on training and testing staff on phishing and spam emails? And, we're tested on this constantly at First Bank. And I think, some of our client base may think that that's something larger companies can afford and can do. And one, I would always warn or, try to advise them that the time and cost of prevention is way less than the time and cost of, getting burned by fraud. So there's that piece. But, Ron, what would you say, or what do you suggest to, your client base if they're saying, well, maybe that's, we're too small for that, or, what are those best practices?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Prevention is it's going to cost you a lot less than having to recover from it. Definitely you want to train your folks, right? Your employees, or it might be, you want to train people to understand that, number one, there are bad actors out there and they're going to try to target our organization, and here's how they're going to target. So training is always key. I've saved several organizations said, hey, we've got this great policy, but they never trained their people on it, right? So having the policy, but training folks and then testing it and letting them know that you're going to test it, right? So, sending a email that is a phishing email, so to speak, and through your IT, and it's pretty easy for IT organizations to set these up. And if a person responds to it or opens it, they're sent to a page for some training, right? And it's not a slap on the hand or anything like that. It's just try to refresh and reestablish that, here's what you need to be on the lookout for. And, what comes across, I mean, I've fallen for it before, right? Luckily it was my organization, right? You get something that says, hey, this is, I got one time that said, this is from the baseball operations director at the St. Louis Cardinals. I've been trying to reach your boss. And, so I opened the email just thinking, well, what's going on here? And then I realized, oh, it's a phishing attack, right? So, but it sent me to an education page, and again, I've seen this at many of our clients too, where, the VP of internal audit falls for this, the CFO falls for it, whoever it might be, somebody in a high position. But as long as, the best thing we can do is train, retrain, and continue to train folks on this, because the fraudsters, unfortunately, are always a little bit ahead of us, right? And we're trying to play catch up to a certain extent. So again, if you get that feeling in your gut when you get an email, when you get a text that something you weren't expecting and it just doesn't quite seem right, go to IT right away. A lot of organizations will have it on you'll see it on your email system where you can report, potential phish attack. IT investigates it, lets you know yay or nay, right? So, those are some of the things you need to do.
Right. Well, I think an added benefit of that, beyond the training to get people to be more vigilant themselves, is the culture of vigilance that creates, right? And having discussions about it, because, I know it's tempting for as an individual or as a consumer to say, okay, I did this VPN, or we have a plan and we've told people once about, phishing, and put it aside because we all have, the business to get back to. And you tend to forget about it. But I think, doing those things, not only does it train people, it just reinforces that there is a culture of security and verification, and that it's okay to raise your hand and say, does that wire really need to go out right now?
Right.
So, I mean, I think that's important. And Ron, it may have been you that shared with us. I mean, I thought that was interesting. You shared with us some data on the percentages of what, lack of certain controls, what percent of each control fraud is attributed to. So I think when I added up the top ones that you had sent over, 75% of all fraud is due to either control issues and or a lack of culture and oversight. And I don't know if you have any follow-up kind of thoughts on it.
So what you're referring to, this comes from an organization called the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. They put together a report every 2 years that looks at what we call occupational fraud. And occupational fraud is, yeah, where an employee basically takes advantage of an employee organization for their personal enrichment. And they take a look at the statistics around that. And yeah, definitely controls are so important, right? And one of the charts they provide, it shows, okay, in the fraud scenarios where this control was not in place, here's the loss, right? Versus here's the loss if the fraud still occurred, but we had a control in place, right? Because the way fraud works, we want to prevent as much as we can, but we realize we're never going to prevent it all. So the sooner we can detect it, the better. And if you've got controls in place, controls are meant to hopefully prevent, but if they can't prevent, then detect a fraud. And the sooner we detect that fraud, the less our fraud losses are going to be. So the whole idea is make sure you have these controls in place, like a fraud hotline, right? Someplace where, whether it be an employee, whether it be a vendor, whether it be a customer, they can reach out. And if they see something that does not look right, they can let the right people know within the organization. So having that in place, having bank reconciliations, right? So many of my clients I go to, one of the first questions we'll ask is, when can we see your last bank reconciliation? And I will tell you, there are several who haven't done them in months, unfortunately. It's critical. I'm working with a client right now where we're having to go back 5 years on bank recs to try to figure out what happened. So that's a critical control.
Right. Well, and I think that even applies. I know, the audience here may even, is spanning from individuals up to businesses of all sizes. And I think even as an individual, that's important. Look at your checking account, look at your credit cards. I think to Walt's point, if you have the app on the phone, I mean, you can set up all sorts of alerts for activity, different thresholds, but checking into that to say, hey, is that right? Does this look right? Versus saying, oh, wow, why is my account now at 0 or negative? That seems,
Right.
Odd. So, I mean, I think that's an important point that covers business and consumer finances. What are some other, as far as that internal fraud? I think you had mentioned that tip line catches a lot of that. That, is a way that it's caught. How else do you help, do you recommend clients detect fraud, and also, maybe some controls that are top of mind to help, reduce the amount of fraud and or the frequency in which it would be caught?
Sure. So Pete, let me back up just a minute, because
Sure.
when you think about occupational fraud, there's really 3 categories. It's asset misappropriation. That's where somebody can steal cash, steal time, inventory equipment, corruption. That, maybe you've got somebody who's getting a kickback to push business one way or the other. And then the third category is financial statement fraud, where somebody's cooking the books, essentially, right? So those are really the 3 categories. And again, some of the statistics that come out through this Association of Certified Fraud Examiners is just, they amaze me every year. Because think of your organization, whether you're a person, a one person mom and pop shop, whatever the case might be, or a huge organization. It's estimated that 5% of organizations, or not 5%, but organizations lose 5% of their annual revenue to fraud. Think about that from your perspective, right? That is a statistic that, the ACFE has done this report at least 10, maybe 15 times every year. It's consistent with that 5%. So that's something, to be cognizant of. And then on average, most of these frauds last about 12 months. So, there's time to catch it. And the thing that always really bothers me as a CPA, I hear all the time from my clients, when I talk about fraud prevention and detection, well, it's not going to impact us. We have an annual audit. That's not a thing I like to hear, because the annual audits there's a materiality threshold. They're looking at certain things in your financials. They're not going to catch all fraud. You need to have more. So having, like, the hotline we talked about, Pete, tip line, whatever you want to call it, something where folks can report in, but also getting back to a point earlier, training individuals on what fraud looks like, having good policies, having that culture in place where they feel secure in, maybe it is fraud, maybe it's not, but if they've got that gut feeling somewhere they can report to and feel good about it. Another key controls management reviews, right? So management coming in and doing their job and overseeing and reviewing transactions and things of that nature, that helps quite a bit. Document examination, a lot of times, we'll find, I had a major university where for expense reporting, they had over 5,000 credit cards out there, and the expense review process was just a check. Nobody was really looking, and fraud was running rampant in that organization. So just having, that document examination and management oversight, doing your account reconciliations, having a good hotline, those are all good controls to have in place. Building that culture of trust, building that culture of, folks feeling secure in reporting.
And I know this is something that we used to talk about at my, previous employer, and we talk about with clients all the time now. And it's challenging depending on how big your, finance departments are, or your purchasing departments. But the whole concept of, I think, least privilege needed is how I would say that, is that when you're giving people entitlements to the bank accounts and to ACH or wire money, that you're saying, okay, well, how much access to information, financial or otherwise, because I think, and Walt, maybe you would speak to this too, that it's not just dollars and cents people are after. They're really after any confidential information that they can then leverage into financial gain. But that idea of saying, how do we separate and segregate duties or add a second or third set of eyes to these things? And at small businesses, it is challenging because maybe you have a finance staff of 1 or 2. And while you have dual controls, if someone's on vacation, you could say, well, we'll let the one person do it. And, I would recommend, and I think we've discussed that it's just the time and, perceived hassle is definitely worth it compared to the risk that you open yourself up to by saying, okay, you know what, we're going to give 3 people in, quality control access to the accounts too, in case, Brenda's out on vacation. And again, don't know if you guys want to elaborate either on that or the idea that some of what fraudsters are doing with non-financial information.
Yeah, I mean, my apologies for the sound quality. I'm not, hopefully this is a little bit better.
Yeah, I think so far that is better. Thank you.
Very good. I'll talk directly to the earpiece. I think it talks to, the concept of firewalling and being able to take the assets and keep them in secure places depending on their value, right? Information has to be regarded as valuable. And it brings in the concept of confidential information and PII, because that is what the criminal is going after, and that's what they're going to be able to exploit to be able to establish a foothold within your organization. Typically, someone who's committing digital fraud will come into an environment and camp out somewhere within your network, sometimes for months, to collect the data on what the processes are internally, which people can provide approvals, which people may be out of the office at any point in time. And that information, right, becomes valuable to them. Being able to protect that information, being able to, for example, not have an out of the office message that says, I'll be traveling in Belgium, during these days, and being more cautious, just stating that, for any information, this is who you contact. Be more anonymous. Don't provide key data, valuable data, to the general public. But I think being able to sequester and keep your important assets, whether they're information, or access or process, in a closed environment as much as possible, helps to provide that protection. Another piece that I missed out on earlier was just identifying a best practice in phishing. I think it's important too for people to mix it up, because complacency is really the enemy right, of security. You can have phishing tests that go on and they can provide a general, easy level of phish testing, and your population gets used to it and you have fantastic scores, right, for your phish tests. Mixing it up for tests that are much more complicated, much more challenging, even if you get a high fail rate, is important, because that it gets your population attuned to various levels of testing. And cyber criminals certainly will try to be clever. Some are more clever, some are broad brush. So orienting your team via phish testing to the various levels is very important as well. Then being able to, as a next best practice, go after, and in a very constructive fashion, the repeat offenders, the people who are failing tests 2 or 3 times in a row. Those are your obvious weakest links. Provide them with training as they become further repeat offenders. If they get to the 3 or 4 or 5 level, maybe it requires an interview with the owner of the business or the chief compliance officer to, emphasize the importance of their attention and their care. But again, pointing back to, the assets that are there, protecting them, making sure everyone is aware of what the value of them is, the processes that surround them, and how everyone has a role in protecting that for the company, for the organization is very important.
Hey, Pete, can I go back? You mentioned 2 things before: access control and segregation of duties. So, when you're looking at your system, who has access to what, right? And I've got 2 just short stories I'll tell on this, but access control, it's critical because, like you mentioned, data can be stolen. Things can happen. I had one client who didn't have the system locked down, and several folks were able to get into the HR payroll system and change their pay because they had access to that, right? So you want to make sure that, if you're looking to see, who has access to view, edit, change, that within your system, you've got that structure set up, right? And you're protecting your data that way. Right. The other one I'd say,
yeah. Oh, sorry, Ron. I was going to say, I think that's also really important to keep in mind, where it's, a lot of times people think, oh, well, it's insiders are malicious. It's malicious intent. And you may say, well, this person's been with us forever. Or I think a lot of times people will get promoted into a different role, but their access is never updated. You always add access, but you don't take it away. And while, somebody could be with the company for a long time, I think throughout banking, even outside of kind of information and fraud, you can see sometimes if there's a fraudulent activity, it's good people a lot of times that mean to do it. And they say, oh, maybe I'm going to do it this one time because I just need to get to my next paycheck, or I just need to do whatever. And I'll do it for this small amount. And then when it happens, it's like, well, okay, I need to do it again, and maybe a little larger and a little larger. And it really builds from there. So I think at times you get complacent with people, and it doesn't mean that you mistrust people. But I guess in a slight version of that, trust but verify is, if somebody doesn't need access, then get rid of it. It's not a demotion or anything. It's just good security.
And there was a study, and I wish I could remember who did this now, that came out through the pandemic, right? Because there are a lot of people who left the workforce during the pandemic, and there were not good controls around. Some of these people kept their access to the system, were able to get in, right? Once they left. So that's something that, more IT departments are looking at now, make sure we have good exit controls for folks. When you leave an organization, that your access to the system is turned off. That's something that, again, believe it or not, came out of the pandemic. We learned a lot from the pandemic, like work from home, right? And the risk there. But the other point that you picked up on before was segregation of duties that I wanted to talk about a little bit. And again, it's making sure that you have eyes on a transaction, essentially, making sure you had that segregation. Somebody's reviewing and approving the transaction. Good story. And this, you may or may not have heard this one, but it's the biggest municipal fraud to happen in this country. Happened in Dixon, Illinois, by a lady named Rita Credwell. Rita was making probably $70,000 a year. She stole, I think, over $5 million, something like that. And the city had a budget of, it was about 900,000, something like that. But she had control of everything, right? Nobody challenged Rita. Rita did everything. Nobody, she just controlled everything and was able to set up an account, siphon money into that account. The way it was caught is she took a vacation. But you also picked up on, signs of a fraudster too. She was living a lavish life. She raised horses, had a big horse ranch, and these horses are hundreds of thousands of dollars. Who thought Rita could afford that on her $70,000 to $80,000 a year salary? But I'd encourage those who are more interested in that story. There is a documentary out called All the Queen's Horses, that on Rita and what she did there. It's an interesting story, and it really hits to that point on the segregation of duties and why they're important.
Right. Also, I mean, somewhat unrelated, but it's not official. I'm not officially on a webinar. I'm not on a tangent. Is CIA operatives that would make $60,000 a year, but they'd pull up in a BMW 7 Series and be constantly on vacation. So it is those things outside of just that function of your work, is to say, does that make sense that these people can afford this, can be living this lifestyle, doing things like that? And I think what we've also have seen more of is just that some people in finance are like, oh, I've been through many webinars on this, and we're very vigilant on what information we provide. But, I know at First Bank, we're very deliberate in making sure that the phishing tests and cybersecurity, it's really the responsibility of all employees. And if you think about the data that, anybody that's working with vendors has, all of a sudden they can start changing account numbers or providing confidential information. So again, just stressing that it is the company's responsibility or the household's responsibility to disseminate this and ingrain this culture of security throughout all levels of the organization. And obviously reviews may be heightened, or there might be more touch points on some of your finance roles, but it's really kind of part and parcel for everyone to get kind of comfortable with this, on board with this, and be monitored.
You make a really good point, Pete.
Sorry, Walt. I just want to remind everybody that the Q&A section is open. So if you have any questions, we're happy to answer that. Go ahead, Walt. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say that the circle of trust, right, is not just the only part that needs to be insulated from that fraud. It really is like the people that you interact with on the outside. Who do you give your credit card to? Which public Wi-Fi do you tap into or don't tap into? It's generally a good practice not to take, free Wi-Fi in public spaces unless, you have a VPN. These are cautions that increasingly we have to be aware of, because it could be, right, a supplier or someone that we know who gets our email address, who sends us a malicious link, right, via their email, because they're not protecting themselves. So it really is on us to make sure that anyone that we interact with, right, whether they're internal to us, whether we know them, or if we don't, that we're very cautious about what we receive from them in digital format, because it may be inadvertent. They may not know that they're carrying something that is harmful to us.
And then what would you guys recommend to somebody? I mean, unfortunately, I think the reality of the situation is that fraud is a question of if, not, or when, not if. So if a individual or a company or an employee at a company realizes that they've fallen victim to fraud, what would you suggest would be kind of the best next steps?
Definitely, again, if you're within an organization that has a fraud hotline, report it through that fraud hotline. Hopefully there's an anti-fraud policy that your organization has, that you can follow the steps, and you've been educated on what to do and trained on what to do if you see potential fraud. It might be calling a hotline, it might be going to your supervisor or going to somebody else in the organization, but follow those steps, whatever's been outlined by your organization. If nothing's been outlined, then as long as you don't think your supervisor's involved, I would take it to that level.
Right. Speed is extremely important in responding to something like that. Every hour that you wait after being exploited or after being breached, costs money, and in some cases, tremendous amounts of money. And Fortune 500 level, every extra day could cost $1 million or more in damages. So being able to always have the answer to that question in case of breach, who do you call? Does everybody know where that call goes? Is it the help desk? Is it your supervisor? But that answer should be in place, and everyone should be asked regularly. You get breached,
Right.
who are you going to call? Do they know?
And that's a big part, but I'll tell you the other part, because I've seen this fail at a client too, is whoever's receiving those calls needs to know what to do with them. I had one organization, we do fraud risk assessments for different organizations. We'll come in, try to identify where fraud could occur. They had a hotline. They had all these posters set up, right? I called the hotline number. It went to the retired audit director's cell phone. So it wasn't, he had been retired for 3 years. So nobody was getting these calls that could do anything about it. It's making sure that, if we're going to take the time to train our employees what fraud looks like, we're going to give them the avenue to report it. We're taking those reports seriously. We're doing the proper due diligence on those calls that come in. Somebody is working those. And if we determine that a fraud investigation needs to occur, we're pulling the right folks into that investigation as well.
Right.
So the answer to the question, Ron, should not be to the retired auditor, fraud auditor.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think that's just a good point that to kind of stress is that security and fraud prevention, it really needs to be a living thing, a living culture that evolves and changes within your organization. And it's really tempting, I think, to say, oh, I sat down with my auditors 3 years ago and we came up with we reviewed the controls plan and it was fine. And I put it in a binder and it collected dust. Because technology and fraudsters are out there. They're not, resting on technology from 5 years ago. It's that, is this current? Have we reviewed it? Have we discussed it? Have we trained it? And is it still protecting what we think it's going to protect? And does the fraud hotline number go to someone who is actively employed at the company? So, and then I guess, quickly with that, on the banking perspective, if you know that you've been the victim of financial fraud, reach out to your banker. Doesn't mean we can always, return and mitigate that fraud completely. But the sooner your bank knows about it, the sooner we can also play a role in helping, ideally, stop the fraud, understand what's going on, have the best chances of mitigating that fraud, and then also, kind of working with you from there to say, okay, how do we prevent this from happening again?
That lessons learned is important, right? How do we stop this from happening again? Because I've been involved in several investigations, some of them with the FBI, local police, whoever. They're going to do a good job, of figuring out who did what and how much it cost you. But the lessons learned is critical. I'd make sure that you have someone involved, because typically when this happens within an organization, the control has failed. You need to learn from that and be able to tighten up those controls.
Is there anything, we're still open to Q&As, but is there anything that either of you gentlemen would like that we kind of missed in our flow of the presentation that you want to make sure that we kind of impart with the audience here?
Well, I think it's not all doom and gloom, right? There is good news out there, because for all the organization of bad elements out there and the speed with which they're working, the good guys also have good tools. AI works both ways. AI is helping organizations to discover fraud and threat much more quickly and easily. New methods are emerging, right? Those are being brought to bear, and they're being embedded in your devices. Your phones are more secure than they were 3 years ago, than they were 5 years ago. There are a lot of knowledgeable resources, people are learning, and this is becoming a way of life. You clearly are more cautious about your email inbox now than you were 5 years ago. We're all used to, right, those levels of threat. So it's becoming part of our fabric, right? Because it needs to be. And above all of it, you still have to focus on the fundamental knowledge, right? You have to still know yourself and understand your business processes and how they flow. And that familiarity inherently will let you know when something is not the norm or something is out of that process. And that's when vigilance should step up a little bit more. So, I think all of that is evolving in our culture. The technology is stepping up. It's not a one-sided game. We definitely have, an advantage, a lot of ways against threat actors. And the biggest advantage is that we have control over our assets.
And here we've got some questions that have come in here. I think it was kind of hung up because now I'm getting a bunch. Either that or you guys hit the right note, and we're getting a bunch here. Real quickly here, what is First Bank doing to protect against check washing activities? We can get into the detail of that if you contact your banker, and we can get into a lot of detail. But I think the biggest thing we've had out there, again, this is older technology, but we're always updating the ease in using it, is positive pay. So if you're writing a lot of checks, I mean, there's ways that you can either kind of default to only approving certain. Sorry, I'm getting another note here. Yeah, is positive pay where you can either default to everything gets rejected unless you approve it, or you can upload a file of approved checks, and therefore the bank will only, process a check if the payee, date, dollar amount, everything lines up. And otherwise it's an exception, which, if there's an error and you want it to go through, you can review that and process it, or it gets caught and does not get presented for payment. Again, we're more than happy to talk to individuals on a specific basis. Hang on, let's see. Political. Could we expand on the added risk of working from home employees, and what are some of those risks?
Yeah, I mean, definitely from the work at home perspective, what kind of access do they have to your data, right? And what data might be sitting around in their home office that anybody else can see? That's a big risk. A virtual private network, making sure we have VPN set up. We got calls when the pandemic first hit. Folks were, how are we going to pay bills? All our people are home now, and so they're rushing to make sure people have access to systems, and maybe they gave more access than they needed, right? And again, that's something that needs to be taken into account. Again, what are folks doing with that access while they're at home? They might be more likely to if they're not being wide, they're not in an office environment. What happens with that data? That's the big concern in my mind.
Now, another is just orienting employees that their work environment at home is an extension of the work environment. That their kids should not be playing video games, right, on their workstation, right, or surfing the web on their workstation. That it is an extension of the work environment, then all those rules apply. Another aspect is to provide education to employees who are working from home as to how to secure their network, and provide them the resources so that they can secure it properly. So they can have a firewall in place, so they're taking the proper precautions, and that their education from work extends out into their personal environment. One good practice, another best practice, is to provide a personal cyber hygiene course to employees so that they can go and take care of their own assets internally at home. Set up the firewalls, clean up their PCs, have antivirus on all of their devices at home, so that as they take that care with their personal lives, right, it adds additional meaning to the care that they take in their work lives as well. That's natural extension. So you're helping them out with their individual home situation, and you're emphasizing the importance of that in the work environment as well.
Yep. And I think there's a related question here that I think we've touched on, and I will try to answer it more directly, and the experts feel free to correct me. Why do you recommend not using free Wi-Fi? How does it put us at risk? I think if you're using free Wi-Fi without a VPN, which is a virtual private network, it's basically kind of, similar to, right, clicking on a phishing or a spam link that it would allow someone to get onto your network. And I think we touched on it earlier, and as I researched for this webinar, because it doesn't come as naturally as it seems, is that a lot of times it's like over a month, up to 2 months before, if you click on that or somebody's in your network, that they will hang out for a month or two, like you said, Walt, to understand your practices, to glean as much information as possible before you might get that ransomware request saying, oh, hey, by the way, you need to pay us X number of dollars. So any way that you can limit the people on your network, the better, right?
So there's a great video that emphasizes that point very well. It's a classic with a van with ethical hackers parked outside of a Starbucks and tapping into their free Wi-Fi at the Starbucks. And as they go through that, they hack into the point of sale system, and when someone's name is on a cup, they send a message to that customer telling them that their coffee is ready, right? Or providing that, or as that customer is leaving the Starbucks, they tell them what their banking activity was. And as the people are walking out of the Starbucks and they're confronted by the reporter, they're amazed that how could you have found out, my information, because you tapped in with your device through the public Wi-Fi at Starbucks. The main reason is public Wi-Fi is much more easily hackable than Wi-Fi at home that's protected by firewalls or private enterprise Wi-Fi. It's a convenience, but it's a dangerous one. Proceed with caution. And if you're using one, use a VPN.
We've got another question here. Is there a danger to sending info for a bank wire via email? More specifically, it goes on, but I mean, the question is, best practices for wires and sending information. Obviously, to send a wire, we as a bank need that information, but you should be able to do that via the bank's, your own portal or whatever you sign into at the bank, and that you can initiate that wire directly within the bank software versus sending an email. Outside of that, there's also ways that you can, initiate a wire in person at a branch, or, there's usually phone verification. So we're talking about all this technology, but every once in a while it goes back to the verification is kind of best done some old-fashioned ways of the bank then calling you at a known number to the bank to say, okay, Ron, you provided me your cell phone number months ago. I am now going to call your cell phone number and verify that the wire information that we, the bank, have received is correct. So again, there are best practices to make sure that you're using the bank approved methods to communicate that, and that there should be some sort of double verification on that. And at the time, if you're in a hurry, it again may seem like an inconvenience, but it is really there to serve and protect you and your best interests. Because especially with wires, once a wire is out, that's what's so great about them. They're convenient, but the money is out of your account and gone. There is sometimes a brief recovery period, but it is a financial vehicle that is there to move money very quickly, and fraudsters know that. So good question there. If fraud has happened as an individual, what can you do to try to stop it happening again? I've had my identity stolen many times. What would you recommend for the individual in trying to protect their information, their identities?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, from a
Ron.
preventative standpoint, the less you put out there, right, the better, probably. Making sure that you're not signing up for various credit cards, things of that nature. The less information you put out there, the better.
Yeah, that's one. Another would be for multiple events like that, what's been the pattern? What led to your identity being stolen in the first place? Did you repeat that same action, or was it a different action? I think one of the best cautions is, as Ron said, don't put your information out there unless it's absolutely necessary. I don't share my email. I don't share my phone number unless it's absolutely required, and unless I know it's in a secure place. You can engage if you have multiple events like that and you're really just being peppered with it, you can engage a service which will search on the dark web for your identity that may have been stolen multiple times and propagated out there, and criminals are buying it for their campaigns. So you could engage a service like that to clean your clean yourself up out on the web and the dark web. However, it's a little bit more of an extreme adventure, but if you're having repeated incidences, it's for a reason, and you may want to take a little stronger measure.
Great. We have another comment here that someone anonymously posted that they did a webinar with their staff last weekend and gave the example of a CEO asking for purchase of gift cards. And then on Monday, 2 different employees received emails with that same kind of scam being run, and they alerted the privacy officer immediately. So they just wanted to point out how important that timely education is. And, you know, I think it's timely and repetitive because, again, fraudsters are going to keep trying. So if you say, oh, we did that one back in January, we're good till next January, you kind of miss it. And that's great to see that kind of immediate payoff for people. And I'm sure that helped build that culture of security at that organization. Here's one that I personally am in the market for as well. And I think Google's working on it, but I'm sure you guys might be able to give some better recommendations. Can you recommend an app or program that would help us manage passwords, including regular changes to passwords, and tracks, you know, different passwords over things? And I know repetitive passwords is a problem, simplified passwords is a problem, but, you know, as we all have more digital touches and apps, you know, what would you guys recommend as a best practice there?
You know, IT is not my area, but I definitely, you know, what we're doing now is more phrases than passwords, right? Using a phrase instead of a password. And we do have, my goodness, I can't think of the tool now that we use that tracks our passwords and manages them, but we do have a tool that does that for us.
Yeah, and I think in our life, professionally and even personally, I just see a lot more dual factor authentication. Yeah. So that's where, you know, you put in your password or whatever, and then you're going to get a text message and you're going to have to put that code back in. And like I said, I'm not the IT expert on this, especially on the individual level, but I do know that, you know, I think Google is trying to tackle this in a really secure way. And there are apps out there that do it, but I wouldn't want to speak to how safe they are, because you are also kind of making a nice target for folks, I think, if you're aggregating all of your passwords in one spot. So I guess we'll defer from there as being a little out of the scope of our expertise. I think we've got just a few minutes left, so I wanted to oh, and somebody here is suggesting LastPass, but again, we're not, I can't confirm that. I haven't used it, but something to potentially look into.
I'm sorry, I dropped out for a little bit, but yeah, LastPass is a fine application, and there are many password managers available, either on the Android or the iOS platform. And a good password manager is a good choice, only because I looked one day and I saw that I had about 270 accounts and passwords in my password manager. So they tend to add up, and it's good to have it in a central place, protected.
Yep. And then somebody just asked, what's a name of a good dark web checking service, if you have any that you would recommend, or is that something that you just Google?
I think, yeah. So I don't have the name of a good one.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll be happy if someone would like to just send me an email. I'm happy to recommend one.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think we've got a couple minutes left, but Ron and Walt, on behalf of First Bank, we want to thank you. We want to thank everyone that has joined us on this call today. It will be available for replay. I think that's usually done within a day or two after this. So you should be able to go back out to the link and listen to this all over again. And I'd like to say thank you. And remember, it just, again, can't emphasize enough that it takes vigilance, and it's something that needs to be alive and that you work on often. Again, fraudsters aren't going to rest with it, so you can't kind of say, oh yeah, we're done with that and put it away. Any closing remarks from either of you gentlemen?
Just to echo what you said, be vigilant, trust but verify.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope you all have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.